Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm self-employed and run two businesses, one of them being a used car dealership specializing in German vehicles. My father was always passionate about BMWs, and I guess that rubbed off on me. Recently, I treated myself to an almost brand new BMW G31 530D. It only had 6,000 kilometers on it and was barely 6 months old. One evening around 6 p.m., I was driving home with about 150 kilometers still ahead of me. I was getting hungry and didn't want to wait until I got home for dinner, so I pulled into one of the gas stations along the Autobahn. Due to COVID restrictions at the time, fast food places weren't allowed to have indoor dining after 6 p.m. So after getting my food from the drive-thru, I parked my car and decided to sit in the trunk area to eat my dinner comfortably. I was just getting settled in when an old minivan pulled up next to me. A woman got out and immediately gave me this disgusted look. I didn't think much of it and continued eating, but then she walked right up to me. She demanded to know what I was doing there. I politely responded that I was just eating dinner. Nothing special. She then asked where the owner of the car was, and when I told her I was the owner, she became even more aggressive. She accused me of lying, saying there was no way a young kid like me could own such an expensive car. She then made a racist remark, pointing out that I didn't look German at all, so I must have stolen the car. I should mention that I have a slightly darker skin tone since my mother is part Asian. Before I could even properly respond, she cut me off. She started yelling that she didn't want to hear any more lies and threatened to call the police if I didn't hand over the keys, so she could return the car to its rightful owner. I simply told her to go ahead and call them. I honestly thought she was joking, but to my surprise, she actually called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later, a female and male officer. Ironically, they were driving the same BMW model as mine, just in police colors. The female officer approached me first very professionally, asking if everything was all right and requesting my version of events. Before I could even start explaining, the woman pushed herself between us. She started ranting at the officer, demanding to know why she was being nice to me. She insisted that I had stolen the car and wasn't even old enough to drive. She demanded that they arrest me immediately and give her the keys, claiming she knew the car's owner and would return it. The female officer tried to calm her down, explaining that she couldn't arrest someone just because someone else demanded it. She told the woman she needed to do her job properly and asked her to step aside and speak with her colleague instead. The woman became even more belligerent, demanding that the officer do her job and pulling the "I pay your salary" card. The male officer then stepped in, pointing out how strange her behavior was compared to my calm demeanor, and warned her that she would face serious problems if she didn't behave herself. The woman went with the male officer while I explained everything to the female officer. I showed her my ID, driving license, and car papers. She went to verify everything in their police car while I waited, just playing on my phone. When she returned, she said everything was fine and asked if I wanted to press charges against the woman for her racist behavior. I declined, just wanting to finish my dinner and get home. When I was about to close my car's back door, the woman suddenly lunged at me, trying to reach into my pockets. She started screaming about the keys, saying I didn't deserve the car and calling me racist slurs. She told me to go steal another car and fool the police again. The officers immediately handcuffed her and put her in their car. They asked again if I wanted to press charges, and this time I said yes. This had gone from annoying to a physical assault. Later, I found out she was charged with attempted robbery, assault, and racial discrimination. She got a suspended sentence of 8 months and had to pay a substantial fine. Her behavior during the trial didn't help her case. She kept insisting she was protecting German property and doing her civic duty. The judge was not impressed, and neither was her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor the entire time. I still sometimes think about how someone could be so entitled to believe they have the right to take someone else's property just based on their appearance. At least my dinner that evening made for an interesting story to tell at family gatherings. I've been a tow truck operator for over a decade now, specializing in accident recovery and roadside assistance. The job keeps me busy around the clock with our company's 24/7 service, but I've learned to cope with the irregular hours. What I never quite got used to, though, was dealing with entitled people who think their time is more valuable than everyone else's. This incident happened about 5 years ago. I was just getting ready to call it a night around 11 p.m. when my radio chirped. The dispatcher called to check if I was still awake. After I confirmed, they told me about a single car accident in the next town over. The police wanted it handled quickly, so I grabbed my gear and headed out. The drive took about 20 minutes, and as I approached the scene, I immediately knew this wasn't a typical accident. Usually these situations only require one police officer for paperwork, but this time I saw multiple squad cars, a coroner's van, and forensics vehicles scattered across the road. This was going to be one of those rough nights. The scene was devastating. An SUV carrying 6 people had crashed, with only the driver wearing a seatbelt. The driver had swerved off the road and overcorrected, hitting an 8-inch lip on the road's edge. The vehicle rolled several times, ejecting 5 passengers, who all died at the scene. One passenger was trapped under the overturned SUV in a drainage ditch, while the others were covered with sheets on the road. I positioned my Peterbilt rollback truck at a 70-degree angle across the 2-lane road and started working with the forensics team to carefully remove the vehicle while preserving evidence. That's when I heard it, an angry car horn blaring behind me. I turned around to see a woman in her early 40s laying on the horn and screaming out of her window. I ignored her and returned to the delicate task at hand, wondering how she'd gotten past the police roadblock a third of a mile back. While I was carefully winching the 8,000-pound vehicle, I felt someone grab my shoulder, trying to spin me around. Being 6'3" and 280 pounds, this 5'4" woman had no chance of moving me. I took a deep breath, looked skyward for patience, and turned to face her. I tried to explain to her that the road was closed due to a fatal accident, but she cut me off mid-sentence. She rudely demanded that I get out of her way, claiming she was late. Growing extremely annoyed, I raised my voice and told her that 5 people had just died here and no one would be driving through for hours. I suggested she turn around and go back through the police roadblock she'd somehow managed to get around. She responded with that typical entitled attitude, pointing behind her vehicle and declaring that she lived right there. She threatened to call the police if I didn't move my truck immediately, insisting she had to use this road. By this point, the forensics team had heard the commotion and walked over. They were in plain clothes with badges, as it was a weekend night shift. The woman held her phone to her ear and demanded to know which one of us was the manager. She complained that I wouldn't move my truck and announced she was calling the police. When the forensics officer tried to explain that he was with the police, she wouldn't let him finish. Instead, she started clapping between each word, demanding we move the truck. I lost my patience and fired back with a sarcastic comment about her 2 remaining brain cells competing for 3rd place. The forensics officer, trying hard not to laugh, warned her that she'd be arrested if she didn't leave the crime scene immediately. Just then, a police car came racing down the road and stopped behind her vehicle. The officer immediately began reading her rights. She completely lost control, screaming, kicking, and even trying to spit on me, which earned her a tampering with evidence charge since we were at an active crime scene. Her final charges included obstruction, assault on an officer, misuse of emergency services, and interfering with an investigation. She ended up taking a plea deal for 18 weekends in county jail. But that wasn't even the best part. I got to tow her car too. When her husband came to retrieve it Monday morning, he was mortified. He apologized profusely while paying the hefty impound fees. $150 for the impound, $50 for after-hours service, $52 per day for storage, and $5 per mile each way from our office, about 15 to 17 miles. The total came to around $600. The look on his face told me this wasn't the first time he'd had to clean up one of her messes. and something tells me it wouldn't be the last. But at least for those 18 weekends, she had plenty of time to think about the night she tried to drive through an active crime scene. I'm a 15-year-old girl who's been doing a paper round for the past 2 years. My parents have always taught me about the value of money and independence. So when I turned 13, I decided I wanted to start earning my own spending money. Since I couldn't legally get a proper job in the United Kingdom yet, delivering newspapers seemed like the perfect option. The job itself isn't glamorous, waking up at 5 a.m. every morning, cycling through the neighborhood in all kinds of weather, but it gave me enough pocket money to buy things I wanted without having to ask my parents. Plus, most of the people on my route were really nice. Some would even leave me Christmas cards with a little bonus during the holidays. Everything was going smoothly until about 2 months ago when my boss added a new house to my route. It wasn't just any house. It was this massive place, sitting at the very edge of my delivery area, practically in the next neighborhood. The extra distance wouldn't have bothered me that much if the people living there weren't complete nightmares. From day one, they started making my life difficult. First, it was about the magazines that were supposed to come with the newspaper. My boss would sometimes forget to include them, which wasn't my fault. But guess who got yelled at? When this happened, I would politely apologize and promise to check with my boss about the missing magazine. But Karen would just snap back that it was unacceptable and that they were paying for a complete newspaper service. It didn't stop there. They found something new to complain about every single week. Karen would yell at me about not closing their gate properly, claiming it was dangerous. I would apologize and promise to be more careful, but it never seemed to satisfy them. Her husband would shout at me to stay away from their Ring doorbell, complaining that they didn't want me setting it off every morning. I tried explaining that I was just trying to deliver their paper, but they wouldn't listen. The most ridiculous complaint came when I waved back at their young daughter who would sometimes watch me from the window. The mother actually called my boss about it. She accused me of being inappropriate with her daughter and demanded that I stop waving and making gestures. This went on for weeks, and I was getting more frustrated by the day. Then, 5 weeks ago, they filed another complaint about a missing magazine, except this time I had triple-checked that it was included before delivery. That was the last straw. The next morning, at exactly 6 a.m., I stood at their door and knocked, and knocked, and knocked some more. Finally, the wife came to the door, looking like she'd been dragged out of bed, which she had been. She demanded to know what I wanted in an angry tone. I responded with fake cheerfulness, explaining that I was just delivering their magazine and making sure they received it personally this time. I've never seen someone look so angry, yet so powerless. She knew she couldn't complain. Their precious Ring doorbell had recorded the whole interaction, showing me being nothing but professional while personally ensuring their delivery was complete. For the next 5 weeks, I kept up my new delivery method. Every morning, 6 a.m. sharp, I would knock until someone answered. Sometimes it took 5 minutes, sometimes 10. I didn't mind waiting. Watching them drag themselves out of bed at dawn was worth every second. This morning, though, something different happened. The husband opened the door and he looked absolutely exhausted. The fight had completely gone out of him. He finally admitted defeat, apologizing for all the complaints and begging me to stop knocking so early and just put the paper through the door like before. I responded sweetly that I just wanted to make absolutely sure they received everything they paid for, emphasizing how important customer satisfaction was to me. When I got home this morning, I could barely contain my smile. They've become the most polite customers on my route now. The gate comments stopped, the Ring doorbell complaints vanished, and yesterday, I even saw their daughter in the window again. I waved, and this time no one called my boss to complain. I never expected my life to change so dramatically after my grandmother passed away. We were always close. She practically raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She wasn't wealthy by any means, but she was smart with her money and investments. When she passed away last month, she left me her entire savings and her house, which together came to about $450,000. I didn't tell anyone at work about the inheritance at first. I kept doing my job as a senior accountant at the same mid-sized firm I'd been with for the past 5 years, living my regular life while quietly sorting out the estate matters. The only visible change was that I moved into my grandmother's house, which was in a nicer neighborhood than my old apartment. That's when my boss started acting weird. He must have noticed my change of address in the HR system because he suddenly began asking very personal questions about my living situation during our weekly meetings. He commented about how he'd heard I moved to Oak Hills and remarked that it was quite an upgrade from my old place. I simply told him that my grandmother had left me her house. He expressed his condolences and then immediately asked if she had left me anything else. I should have been more guarded, but I didn't see any harm in being honest at the time. I admitted that she had left me her savings too. His eyes lit up in a way that made me uncomfortable. The very next day, he called me into his office for a casual chat. He started by telling me he'd been meaning to talk about something regarding his son, who was apparently having a really tough time in college. When I expressed sympathy, he went on about how tuition keeps going up and complained about the economy. He said he hated seeing his son struggle with student loans and part-time jobs when he should be focusing on his studies. I knew where this was going but hoped I was wrong. Then he suggested that since I'd recently come into some money, maybe I could help his son out. He even tried to guilt me by pointing out that I don't have children of my own and said it would be a wonderful opportunity to be a mentor to a young person. I politely declined, saying I was uncomfortable with that arrangement. He pressed on, suggesting that even just $1,000 a month would make such a difference, and tried to convince me I could write it off on my taxes as a charitable contribution. I had to explain that's not how tax deductions work and declined again. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. He started leaving printouts of college expense breakdowns on my desk. He'd corner me in the break room to tell me about his son's struggling grades due to working part-time jobs. Then he began telling other managers that I had more money than I knew what to do with. One morning, I found several co-workers giving me cold shoulders. Later, I overheard him in the break room telling others how sad it was to see young people these days hoarding wealth while others struggle. He claimed that when he was starting out, people believed in helping each other. The final straw came when I checked my pay statement and noticed my hours had been cut. When I confronted him about it, he tried to brush it off as a temporary adjustment due to budget constraints, even though I knew we were in our busiest season. I'd had enough. I went straight to human resources with documentation of everything: the harassment about my inheritance, the attempted financial manipulation, the defamation to co-workers, and the retaliatory pay cut. I also included printouts of text messages where he'd asked for specific amounts of money, which proved this wasn't just a misunderstanding. The human resources director was horrified. She immediately escalated it to the company's legal team. Within days, my boss was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. They uncovered that he'd done similar things to other employees in the past, pressuring them for loans or investments in various schemes, but no one had formally complained before. 2 weeks later, he was fired for harassment and creating a hostile work environment. The company gave me back pay for the cut hours and offered to transfer me to our downtown office with a promotion. I took it. His son wasn't even struggling in college. Through the investigation, we learned he had a full academic scholarship and was doing quite well. The boss had been trying to scam me to fund his own gambling debt. I still work for the same company, but now I'm a department head at the downtown office, making 30% more than I did before. Sometimes I drive past my old office building and think about how my boss's entitlement and greed ended up costing him everything. I heard he's working as a junior bookkeeper at a small tax preparation chain now, quite a fall from his former executive position. I kept my grandmother's house, invested most of the money, and set up a small scholarship fund at the local community college. The first recipient was actually one of my former co-workers' kids, the same co-worker my ex-boss had turned against me during his smear campaign. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.